Black waitress serves Donald Trump, then he gives her a note. Reading it, she bursts into tears. Tanya, a waitress who had been working here for years, serving customers, smiling through exhaustion, hoping for a few good tips to make rent just a little easier this month. It was just another shift until the door swung open. A hush fell over the diner. Conversations faded into whispers. Some customers turned their heads, others quickly reached for their phones. Tanya looked up, confused, then she saw him. Standing just inside the doorway, scanning the room with an unreadable expression, was Donald Trump. Tanya's heart skipped a beat. She had served all kinds of customers, but never a former president. For a brief second, she hesitated. What was he doing here? Why this small-town diner? But she didn't have time to think about it. He was walking toward a booth. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed her notepad, steadied herself, and approached his table. She had no idea that this ordinary shift was about to become the most unforgettable moment of her life. What happens next will shock you. Stay tuned until the end. I hope you love it. Before we continue, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Tanya had worked at Maggie's Diner for as long as she could remember. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, most of the time. Life had never been easy for her. As a single mother of two, every day was a struggle to stay afloat. The rent was overdue again. The utility bills sat unopened on her kitchen table, too painful to look at. Still, Tanya never complained. She worked hard, kept her head down, and did her best. Her regular customers knew her as the waitress who always had a kind word, no matter how bad her day was. But kindness didn't pay the bills. Tips did. That's why, when Donald Trump walked in, her first thought wasn't about politics, fame, or controversy. It was simple. Would he tip well? She had heard stories. Some said he was generous, others claimed he wasn't. But Tanya didn't care about rumors. She treated every customer the same, whether they were a millionaire or a truck driver passing through town. Still, something about his presence made her pulse quicken. This was not a normal day. As she grabbed her notepad and approached his table, she reminded herself, just do the job. Smile, take the order, keep moving. But as she stepped closer, she noticed something. He was watching her. Not in a rude or impatient way, but in a way that felt different. Like he saw something in her that others missed. Tanya cleared her throat, pushing away the thought. "Good afternoon, sir. What can I get for you today?" Trump looked up, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled. Tanya stood with her notepad in hand, forcing herself to stay calm and professional. She had served all kinds of customers before, but this was different. Donald Trump, one of the most recognizable faces in the world, was now sitting at her table. For a moment, the diner felt like a different place. Conversations had died down to hushed whispers. Even her co-workers peeked from behind the counter, their eyes wide with curiosity. But Trump, he looked completely unbothered, as if he had walked into any other restaurant on any other day. He picked up the menu, flipping through it with an easy confidence. Tanya took a deep breath. "Just another customer," she told herself. "Do your job." "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to Maggie's Diner," she said, her voice steady. "What can I get for you today?" Trump glanced up, his sharp eyes meeting hers. He paused for a brief second before smiling. "What's good here?" Tanya blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity of his tone. No arrogance, no demands, just a man asking for a recommendation. "Well," she said, tucking the notepad under her arm, "our burgers are pretty famous around here, but if you want something classic, the meatloaf is my personal favorite." Trump chuckled. "Meatloaf, huh? You convince me." He closed the menu and handed it back. "I'll take that." Tanya nodded, scribbling it down. "Anything to drink?" "Just coffee. Black." Simple order, simple exchange, but something about it felt unusual. As she turned to leave, she could still feel his gaze on her. It wasn't intimidating, just observant, like he was noticing more than just his waitress. Tanya had no idea what was going through his mind, but she was about to find out. Tanya returned a few minutes later, balancing a tray with Trump's coffee and a fresh plate of meatloaf. As she carefully set it down in front of him, she felt his gaze still on her, steady, observant. "Thanks," he said, picking up his fork. He took a bite, nodded approvingly, then looked back at her. "So, how long have you been working here?" Tanya hesitated. She wasn't used to small talk with customers, let alone someone like him, but something about his tone made her answer without thinking. "Almost 6 years, she said, adjusting the tray under her arm. "Pays the bills." Trump tilted his head. "You from around here?" Tanya nodded. "Born and raised. Never really had the chance to leave." He sipped his coffee, then leaned back slightly. "Got a family?" That question hit differently. Not because she was ashamed, but because most people never asked. To them, she was just a waitress, someone who took orders, refilled drinks, and disappeared into the background. But now, she felt seen. "Yeah," she admitted, managing a small smile. "2 kids. Malik is 8. Ava just turned 5. Trump raised an eyebrow. "That's a lot to juggle." Tanya let out a breathy chuckle. "You have no idea." For the first time in a long time, she felt comfortable talking about her struggles. She told him about the long hours, the late nights helping with homework, the exhaustion that never seemed to go away. She didn't mean to open up so much, but somehow the words just spilled out. Trump listened intently, nodding every so often. He wasn't rushing her, interrupting her, or brushing off her words. He just listened. When she finished, she let out an awkward laugh. "Sorry, didn't mean to dump all that on you." Trump smirked, shaking his head. "No need to apologize. Sounds to me like you work harder than half the people I know." Tanya felt her cheeks warm. She wasn't used to compliments like that. He set his fork down, folded his hands on the table, and studied her for a long moment. Then, in a quieter voice, he said, "You ever feel like people don't notice?" That one hit deep. Tanya's smile faltered, because he was right. She nodded slowly. "Yeah, all the time." Trump exhaled through his nose, his expression unreadable. He glanced at the counter where the manager stood watching, then back at Tanya. "Well," he said, reaching into his pocket, "I think it's time someone did." She frowned, confused, as he pulled out a pen. Then, without another word, he picked up a napkin and started writing. Tanya watched, unsure what was happening. Was this a note? What could Donald Trump possibly have to say to her? She had no idea, but in just a few minutes, that napkin would change her life. Tanya stood frozen, watching as Donald Trump carefully wrote on the napkin. His pen moved slowly, deliberately, as if choosing each word with precision. The diner around them hummed with quiet conversation, but in that moment, it felt like the world had gone silent. She wasn't sure why, but her heart pounded. When he finished, Trump set the pen down, folded the napkin neatly, and slid it toward her. Then he picked up the check, pulled out his wallet, and placed a few crisp bills on the table. "Read that when you have a moment," he said, giving her a small nod. Tanya hesitated. She wasn't sure what to say. Instead, she nodded back, quickly gathering the check and napkin as Trump stood up, straightening his jacket. Before he left, he extended his hand. She hesitated only a second before shaking it. His grip was firm, his expression unreadable, but there was a certain weight in his eyes, something genuine. Then, with his security detail waiting by the door, he turned and walked out of the diner. The bell above the door jingled, snapping Tanya back into reality. It wasn't until he was completely gone that she remembered to breathe. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the napkin. The words, written in bold, confident strokes, hit her like a wave. Tanya, I see how hard you work. Never let the world make you feel invisible. You are strong, and your children are lucky to have you. Keep going. Her vision blurred as tears filled her eyes. She had spent years feeling overlooked, like nothing she did mattered. But today, someone had noticed. And not just anyone, Donald Trump. But just as she was trying to process the message, her gaze dropped to the check in her hand. Her breath hitched, because next to the total, in bold ink, was a tip that made her knees go weak. $10,000. The check slipped from her fingers, landing on the counter with a soft flutter. Her co-workers gasped, rushing over as she clapped a hand over her mouth, barely able to speak. "Oh my God," she whispered. Someone snatched the check off the counter, eyes wide. "Tanya, this can't be real." But it was. It was real. Tanya stood frozen, staring at the check like it might disappear. $10,000. It didn't feel real. It couldn't be real. Her hands trembled as she held it, her vision blurring with tears she couldn't hold back. Her co-workers crowded around her, gasping in shock. "Tanya, this is insane. Are you serious? That's more than we make in months." She barely heard them. Her mind was spinning. Just that morning she'd been counting pennies, wondering how she'd afford next month's rent, how she'd put food on the table for Malik and Ava. Now, with just one signature, everything had changed. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she clutched the napkin in her other hand, Trump's words sinking in. Never let the world make you feel invisible. She had spent so many years feeling exactly that, invisible. Just another struggling single mother, working long hours in a job where no one truly saw her. But today, someone had. Someone with power, influence, and the ability to change lives. And instead of walking past her like everyone else, he had stopped, listened, and given her something she never expected, not just the money, a sense of worth. Her manager appeared, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Tanya, what are you going to do?" She wiped at her tears, laughing softly through the emotion. "I'm going home to tell my kids that for the first time in a long time, we don't have to struggle anymore." And for the first time in years, she truly believed it. The diner, once filled with hushed whispers, erupted into chaos. Customers leaned over their booths, servers huddled near the counter, all trying to process what had just happened. $10,000. From Trump? Someone muttered in disbelief. "I never expected that from him," another customer admitted, shaking his head. Tanya still stood there, overwhelmed, her fingers gripping the check like it might disappear. She could barely breathe. The napkin, still crumpled in her other hand, felt even heavier than the money. Her co-worker Lisa gently touched her arm. "Tanya, girl, this is a blessing." Tanya nodded slowly. She knew Lisa was right. This wasn't just luck, it was life-changing. The manager let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "You know this is gonna be all over the news, right?" And he was right. A teenager in the back had already posted about it on social media. The story was spreading fast. Tanya exhaled, her heart still racing. She had spent years serving people without a second thought. Today, for the first time, someone had truly seen her. Not just as a waitress, as a person. A customer near the counter raised his coffee mug. "To Tanya! To Tanya!" the room echoed. Tanya laughed through her tears, raising the check in the air. "And to unexpected miracles!" And with that, the entire diner applauded. By the time Tanya got home that night, the story had already spread. Social media was flooded with posts about the waitress who had served Donald Trump and walked away with a $10,000 tip and a handwritten note that brought her to tears. News outlets picked up the story. Some people praised Trump's generosity, calling it an act of kindness that showed his true character. Others criticized it, claiming it was just for publicity. But to Tanya, none of that mattered. Because this wasn't about politics. It was about a moment where for the first time in years she felt seen. That night, she sat at the kitchen table with Malik and Ava, watching their faces light up as she told them the news. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. Her son squeezed her hand. "Mum, you work so hard. You deserve this." Tears filled her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she believed that. She knew the money would help, but it was the note that would stay with her forever, because sometimes the greatest gift isn't money. It's knowing that someone finally noticed you.